The call dropped at 11:47 p.m., and I stood in the parking lot of a Walgreens in my pajamas, barefoot on asphalt that still held the heat of a Georgia summer, watching my phone die in my hands like the last thing keeping me alive. I had 43 cents in my Venmo balance, I had no shoes, and somewhere behind me, 2 miles back down Peachtree Road, my mother and my brother were sitting in the house I had grown up in, eating the dinner I had cooked, sleeping in the beds I had made, while the locks I had not changed kept me out like a stranger. Before I tell you what my uncle found on my brother's laptop that changed absolutely everything, drop a comment and tell me where you're reading this from. I want to know how far this story reaches. I need you to understand something first. I am not someone who falls apart easily. I am 31 years old. I have a master's degree in accounting. I have spent 8 years building a career from a cubicle in Midtown to a senior analyst position at a firm where people my age are still fetching coffee. I do not cry at commercials. I do not spiral. I plan. I measure twice and cut once, as my grandmother used to say. But that night, standing barefoot on hot asphalt outside a Walgreens at midnight, I understood for the first time what it feels like when the floor you have been standing on your entire life turns out to have been paper all along. It had started like so many catastrophic things do, with something completely ordinary. I'd driven down from Atlanta to my hometown of Macon, a 2-hour drive I had made 100 times, because my mother had asked me to come for the weekend. She said she wanted help going through some of my late father's paperwork. He had passed 8 months earlier, quietly, from a second stroke that came while he was watching a baseball game. She said she needed me. Those were her exact words. I need you, honey. I should have paid more attention to the fact that my brother's truck was already in the driveway when I pulled in on Saturday afternoon. My brother, Garrett, is 35. He lives 40 minutes away in Warner Robins. He does not typically spend Saturday afternoons at my mother's house, unless there is something in it for him. I noticed his truck. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I brought the groceries in from my car, hugged my mother, and started making dinner. Over the past 3 years, my brother had borrowed money from my parents 8 separate times. I know the exact number because I helped my father keep the household accounts after his first stroke. $8,500 for a truck repair that somehow ended up being a down payment on a bass boat. $1,200 for a security deposit on an apartment he left 6 weeks later. $3,000 once described to my father simply as an emergency situation that was never elaborated on. My father, who was the gentlest man I have ever known, always gave it. He never said no to Garrett. He also never told my mother the full sum. After Dad passed, I found the ledger. I sat with it for a long time before I decided not to say anything. My mother was grieving. The numbers were, in the end, my father's choices. And Garrett, whatever else he was still my brother. That was my first mistake. I let something lie because I thought it would stay buried. Saturday dinner was fine. Quiet. My mother talked about a neighbor's new dog and asked me twice if I was seeing anyone. Garrett ate quickly and spent most of the meal on his phone. After we cleaned up, my mother said she was tired and went to bed early. Garrett stayed. I assumed he would leave soon. Instead, he opened a beer and sat down at the kitchen table like he was settling in for the evening. I was washing the last of the pots when he said it. He said our father had wanted him to have the house. I turned off the faucet. He said it casually, like it was something we both already knew and were just now getting around to discussing. He said Dad had mentioned it to him, more than once apparently, that when the time came, the house should go to Garrett because Garrett was the one who had stayed local, who was around, who had been present. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I was careful about this. I took my time. I asked him when exactly Dad had said this. He shrugged. Over the years, different times, he said it was a verbal understanding. I pointed out as gently as I could manage that the house was currently in my mother's name, jointly held with my father's estate, and that nothing in the will, which I had read in full, gave any specific instruction about the house. He said the will was incomplete. He said Dad hadn't finished updating it before the stroke. I put the dish towel down. I said goodnight. I went upstairs. I lay in my childhood bed staring at the ceiling for 2 hours. I told myself he was grieving in his own strange way. I told myself people say things they don't mean when they're looking for footholds in a world that has lost its foundation. I told myself I would talk to my mother in the morning. I did not sleep much. At 6 in the morning, I heard them talking downstairs. My mother and Garrett, voices low. I could not make out words. I told myself they were just talking. By 7, I was up and showered and in the kitchen making coffee. My mother looked at me with an expression I had seen before but never been able to name, something between apology and surrender. Garrett came in at 7:30. He sat down. My mother remained standing by the counter with her coffee cup pressed between both palms. She said, "Your father left some notes." I asked what kind of notes. She pulled out an envelope. Inside were 2 pages, handwritten, in my father's slightly shaky post-stroke script. They were notarized. They were not signed by witnesses. They were not, by any legal definition, a codicil to his will, but they described, in my father's words, a wish that Garrett receive the house, the property, and the remaining savings account, listed separately from the estate, in recognition of Garrett's support during his illness. I read it twice. Then I looked at my mother, who was not meeting my eyes, and at my brother, who was. The handwriting was my father's. I knew his handwriting better than my own. The loops in his lowercase l's, the way he crossed his t's almost as an afterthought, a habit from 60 years of writing left-handed. It was his handwriting, but the language, the phrasing, the specific way the financial account was described by its nickname rather than its number, something sat wrong in my stomach in a way I could not immediately explain. I said I needed some air. I walked to the back porch. I called my uncle, my father's younger brother, who lives in Savannah, who is a retired paralegal, and who is the only person in my family I trusted completely in that moment. I told him what I had just read. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Send me a photo right now." I did. He called back in 4 minutes. He said, "Addie, don't say anything else in that house. Come outside and wait for me." His name is Bernard, and he drove 2.5 hours without stopping. By the time he arrived, the situation inside had deteriorated in the specific way that happens when people are caught mid-maneuver and realize the window may be closing. My mother had gone from passive to defensive. Garrett had made a phone call and then become very calm, which was worse. They had, at some point while I was sitting on the back porch, moved my overnight bag from the guest room to the hallway near the front door. A small gesture. Clear enough. When my uncle knocked, my mother answered the door. She was polite. She offered him coffee. He declined. He sat down at the kitchen table, opened his bag, and took out a folder. He said, "I'd like to see those notes again." Garrett said they were a private family matter. My uncle said, "I am family." There was a pause. My mother brought out the envelope. My uncle put on his reading glasses, read both pages, turned them over, held the second page up briefly toward the window light. He said nothing for almost a minute. Then he asked one question. What was the name of the neighbor who used to bring Dad soup when he was recovering from his first stroke? My mother frowned. She said it was Edith. Edith Kowalczyk, from 2 houses down. My uncle nodded. He asked if Dad had ever mentioned her in writing. Cards, letters, anything. My mother said she didn't know. Why? He reached into his folder. He had printed something, several pages clipped together. He had, in the 2.5 hours while he drove, asked his daughter to pull up a set of emails. My father and my uncle had emailed each other regularly. Birthday messages, fishing trip plans, the mundane correspondence of 2 brothers who loved each other but didn't always say it out loud. My uncle had printed 6 of them, all from the past 3 years, all in my father's voice, with his particular cadences, his abbreviations, his habit of signing off with the same phrase he'd used since the 1980s. He placed the emails on the table next to the handwritten notes. He asked my mother and my brother to look at the word neighbor. In the emails, in my father's real handwriting when he typed, which reflected his actual spelling, his actual word choices, he spelled neighbor the standard way. Every single time. In the handwritten notes on the table, in the second paragraph, the word was spelled Nybor. My uncle said, Your father was an English teacher for 22 years. The silence that followed was not like the silence in a room where a mistake has been discovered. It was the silence of a room where something has ended. My brother pushed back from the table. He said the notes were still valid. He said a spelling error didn't invalidate a document. He said this was a personal family matter and my uncle had no standing here. My uncle looked at him. He said, I have standing here because I'm the one who noticed that the account number this document refers to, described as the secondary fund, is an account your father closed in 2019. An account that, as of the date on these notes, no longer existed, which means whoever wrote this didn't have access to current financial records. My brother's jaw tightened. My uncle kept going. He said he had one more thing. He reached back into his folder and placed a single printed page on the table. It was a screenshot taken from my brother's email, which was still logged in on the desktop computer in my father's old study. The computer my brother had been using for the past hour and a half while I sat on the back porch. My uncle's daughter, who works in IT, had walked him through how to take a screenshot remotely when she forwarded the emails. She had seen something in the sent folder and sent it to him on the drive up. The email on the table was sent from my brother's address to a calligraphy and handwriting services website 14 months ago. The subject line was, Custom Handwriting Sample, Personal Project. My mother made a sound I had never heard her make before. It wasn't a word. It was something that came from a place below language. My brother said that doesn't prove anything. My uncle said, Garrett, I'm a retired paralegal. You won't explain to me what a 62-year-old man's handwriting service invoice is doing in your sent folder addressed to a novelty handwriting website. Garrett stood up. He said this was a betrayal. He said my uncle was tearing this family apart. He said I had always been the favorite, always gotten everything, always been held up while he was invisible, and that for once, just once, something should go his way. His voice cracked on the last sentence. And the thing is, and I hate that this is true even now, I almost felt something for him in that moment. The anger in that crack sounded real. It sounded old. Whatever he had done, the root of it was not fake. But my mother was still standing at the counter with both hands flat on the surface like she needed something solid to hold. She said, Garrett? Just that, his name. He said, Mom. She said, Go home. He said her name. She said, I mean it. Go home right now. He left, without looking at me. I heard his truck start in the driveway, and then the sound of it pulling away. And then there was just the kitchen, the three of us, the emails and the document, and the coffee that had gone cold. My mother sank into a chair. She put her face in her hands. She didn't cry loudly. She made very small sounds, restrained and private, the way people cry when they have spent a lifetime believing that control is the same thing as dignity. I sat down next to her. I didn't touch her right away. I let her have the moment. My uncle quietly gathered the documents back into his folder. He would take them to an attorney friend on Monday. There would need to be a formal letter sent to my brother, a clear record established. The original will, which named my mother as primary beneficiary with the estate split equally between my brother and me, would stand. The handwritten notes would be assessed. If my brother pushed, there were next steps, but my uncle believed he wouldn't push now. The evidence was not subtle. After a while, my mother looked up. She looked at the folder and then at me. She said, How long has he been planning this? I said I didn't know. She said, I believed him, Eddie. He told me your father had mentioned it, and I believed him. I thought I was carrying out what your father wanted. I said, I know. She said, I should have called you before I said anything. I should have called you first. I said, yes. There was a long quiet. Then she said, Are you hungry? I think there's still some of that casserole from last night. And that was it. That was how my family does grief and reckoning, and the specific shame of having almost let something terrible happen. A question about leftover casserole, offered in a voice that held everything that couldn't be said out loud. I told her yes. I was hungry. I would love some. My uncle stayed for dinner. He told old stories about my father. A fishing trip in 1987, a terrible holiday sweater, A dog they'd briefly adopted and then had to rehome. My mother laughed twice, genuine laughs, the kind that catch you off guard. After he left, after the dishes were done again, my mother and I sat on the back porch in the dark. The Georgia summer was all around us. The frogs, the heat still coming up off the concrete, the smell of cut grass from a neighbor's yard. She said, "Your father loved you both equally. I want you to know that. Whatever your brother believed, it wasn't true." I said, "I know that." She said, "But I think Garrett never did." I looked out at the yard. The fireflies were going. On and off, on and off. Small lights in the dark disappear before you can track them. I thought about the ledger, about the money my father had quietly given, again and again, trying to fill something in Garrett that couldn't be filled that way, about how a person can spend decades watching someone else get what they believe should be theirs, and how that can curdle into something unrecognizable over time, something that lets you pick up a pen and practice a dead man's handwriting and tell yourself you deserve it. I didn't say any of that to my mother. Some things you carry alone because putting them down would only move the weight onto someone who's already bent. My brother called me 6 weeks later. He did not apologize exactly. He said he had been in a dark place. He said he knew he had made a mistake. He said he hoped we could back to some kind of normal eventually. I said I appreciated him calling. I meant it. I did not say anything else, and neither did he, and we stayed on the line for a few extra seconds before we both hung up. I don't know what normal looks like now. I'm not sure the word applies anymore, not in the way it used to. What I know is this: my father's will stood. The house belongs to my mother. The estate will be divided as he intended, and somewhere in a filing cabinet in my uncle's study in Savannah there is a folder with a printed email and a spelling error and 6 letters from a man who crossed his T's a certain way, all held together with a binder clip in case anyone ever needs them. My uncle said, "You don't need to be loud to protect what's yours. You just need to be paying attention." He's not wrong. I am still paying attention. I keep thinking about that spelling error. 1 word, 8 letters. Neighbor, spelled Nibor. My father taught English for 22 years. He corrected my book reports with a red pen until I was in high school. He used to say that sloppy writing was just sloppy thinking in disguise, and in the end, it was his own precision, the thing he spent a lifetime practicing, that undid everything my brother had tried to build. That's not luck. That's cause and effect playing out on a longer timeline than most people are patient enough to track. Garrett didn't become someone who could forge a dead man's handwriting overnight. That kind of thing grows slowly, in the dark, fed by years of believing the world owed him something. It kept failing to deliver. Every time my father quietly handed him money without asking questions, I think he told himself it was love. Maybe it was, but it also let him avoid the harder work, the work of building something for himself, of sitting with discomfort long enough to move through it. The shortcut became a habit, and the habit became a plan, and the plan eventually became a forged letter and a spelling error on a kitchen table in Macon, Georgia. I don't say that to be cruel. I say it because I watched it happen, slowly, and I didn't know how to name what I was seeing until it was already finished. What I know now is that the thing that saved me wasn't rage. It wasn't even the evidence, not really. It was the fact that I had spent years paying attention, keeping the accounts, reading the will, knowing my father's handwriting well enough to feel something wrong before I could explain it. That kind of clarity doesn't come from being lucky or clever. It comes from showing up, consistently, even when no one is watching and nothing seems to be at stake. Integrity isn't something you perform in a crisis. It's something you build in the ordinary moments so that when the crisis arrives, you already know who you are. My uncle drove 2.5 hours without stopping because he trusted his own judgment enough to act on it. He didn't wait to be certain. He didn't wait for permission. He pulled together what he had, got in the car, and moved. That's not a small thing. Most people, when faced with something uncomfortable inside their own family, find a reason to wait, to see how it plays out, to avoid being the one who makes it real. Bernard didn't wait, and because he didn't, I didn't lose something that was never Garrett's to take. I think about what my father would have made of all of it. I think he would have been heartbroken, And I think he would have understood more than any of us wanted him to. He knew Garrett. He saw the ledger he never showed my mother. He gave anyway every time, trying to bridge a gap that money was never going to close. You can love someone completely and still be unable to fix the thing that's broken in them. That's one of the harder things I've had to make my peace with. The house is my mother's. The will stands. And somewhere in Savannah, in a filing cabinet in my uncle's study, a folder sits with a binder clip around it, a spelling error, 6 old emails, and a handwriting services invoice, just in case. I am still paying attention. I always will be.